Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Dr. Helen Ofosu. She is a psychologist, an author, consultant, coach, and she is joining us live from Ottawa, Canada, and we'll be talking to her on building resilient organizations by improving workplace culture. Welcome to the show, Dr. Helen.
Good morning, AJ. Nice to meet you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Helen. And we'll be learning a lot from you, not just in India where I am, but also a lot of people will learn from you about resilient organizations, about improving workplace culture. So first to understand from you, Dr. Helen, is in this present times, when there is a lot of this talk about quiet quitting, great resignation, and all that thing is happening now, do you think organizations have time to build resilient organizations and better the workplaces, or is it just like we are only talking and nothing else can be done? How is the situation right now as you see it?
Well, I think a lot of organizations think that all of this stuff about organizational culture is optional and is nice to have. And many of them just focus on the bottom line, thinking this other stuff is just nonsense. But the truth is, if you have a workforce that is not engaged, doesn't want to be there, isn't bringing their full efforts to bear on the work, before you know it, you're not going to be doing very well. And the research is showing that the Great Resignation was fueled by bad organizational culture. People were leaving because they didn't like being mistreated and didn't like watching other people being mistreated.
Right. So how can now organizations, actually those people who want to do it, who are not just doing lip service, actually can get about doing it? Because you also talk about workplace trauma. It is also a difficult word to bear at that. There is trauma in the workplaces. I thought people there go to on. So help us understand first that workplace trauma, what it is all about, and then in the backdrop of great resignation, quiet quitting, and this workplace trauma, what is it that the organizations who are serious about it can retrace some steps, get back on the right track, and do things about improving our workplaces so that people feel joy when they are walking out of their homes and going on to their offices?
Okay. So this workplace trauma thing, I know it sounds exaggerated. It probably doesn't even seem real, like we're being too sensitive. But the fact is that finally there's a recognition and an appreciation that when people are dealing with multiple small injustices and things that just hurt them, whether it's from discrimination, whether it's from sexism, whether it's from transphobia, or whatever the isms are, all of these things, or harassment or bullying, all of these things are creating basically small traumas. And if you add them all together, it's the same impact as if somebody had been in a serious car accident or been assaulted or been like in combat. So it's not a trivial thing, even though a lot of people want to downplay it and make it seem like it's nothing. There's nothing to see here. And so the research is showing that especially during the pandemic, that whole great resignation, one of the biggest predictors of people leaving was a toxic workplace. So things like a cutthroat, very competitive, mean-spirited environment, presence of bullying, harassment, and inequity. So discrimination and mistreatment based on somebody's identity, maybe their skin color, their sexual orientation, disability status, those kinds of things. So it's not really a nice to have. It's a meaningful thing. And I think another piece that I want to make sure I don't forget to mention is that when people are at work and they feel like they need to protect themselves from mistreatment. And it could be mistreatment because of their skin color, their religion, whatever identity factors. The fact is that instead of putting 100% of their effort into their work, maybe 20 or 30% of their effort is going into just surviving and protecting themselves. So I think there's a moral imperative, but also a practical imperative.
Right, right, Dr. Helen. So I was wanted to understand from you,
Mhm.
for the audience, is that uh, why there is so much of difficulty in the workplace, and who creates? Is it the owner, founder, CEO, or can we blame them just? Or is it that in every layer that we interact with different people, they try to hide, whether managers, sub managers, whoever it is, that they try to hide their own insecurities, inefficiencies, and that layer by layer it trickles down to almost everyone in the system. It's almost like a contagion. It works negatively for everyone, and then it becomes a culture in itself, and
Mhm.
everybody all the time just thinks of surviving and being in their comfortable spaces. How do you look at this? Am I right to look at it this way? What is the solution to it? Because it is not about just one or two people. It
That's
cannot be.
it.
It's almost like a global thing, and a lot of people are there within that system. We cannot just blame one or two people or the CEO, the leadership, uh, though the buck stops with them. But what is your understanding of this whole toxicity in our workplaces?
I think there are several layers. So, starting at the top, when you have owners or leaders who hear about terrible things happening and they just ignore it or turn a blind eye, basically they are condoning it and allowing it to continue and probably even spread. So, I think that's definitely an issue. Another issue is probably the way that hiring and promotions and HR is managed. I think that quite often, yeah, I'm not saying there's intention here, but sometimes there are hiring processes in place that basically let problematic people into organizations in the first place, right? So I think sometimes there's too much of a focus on what somebody can do, but not also paying attention to how they do it. Because let's face it,
Right.
you can have very good people in terms of talent, but if one person is creating value but also destroying even more value at the same time because they're ruining the corporate culture, hurting people, distracting people, then in the end, you don't really get very far ahead. And I'm not saying it's intentional, but I think that quite often people think they're great at hiring. They just do it very quickly and without really paying attention to some of the implications of bringing in people who are very ruthless, cruel, maybe even corporate psychopaths. So that's a
Corporate.
second layer. And then I think to your earlier points about people who may be jealous and insecure, there's some recent research called the tall poppy syndrome. And
Right.
it's a bit gendered because it focuses mostly on women. But the gist of it is that you have workplaces where some people maybe have some insecurities, some fragility in terms of their egos. And when they see other people who are performing at their level or higher than their level, they they basically do things to undermine those people, to hurt those people, kind of cut them down. So you've seen flowers where maybe one of them is taller than the rest. So the idea is that they cut off the heads of the flowers that are higher to make everything equal. So this tall poppy syndrome, the gist of it is that certain people are being undermined. They're being told to not work so hard, not shine so bright, so that they don't make other people look bad. And I think that that's probably part of how the scapegoating and other sinister types of mistreatment are happening that are at an individual level.
Right,
Yeah.
right, Dr. Helen. So let's look at this way. In the corporate culture, we say that we seem to hire a lot of people who are supposed to be who bring in great results, and they may be almost, uh, you know, social psychopaths, if we can look at it that way, and several of them, and then we promote them. And at the same time, there is this tall poppy syndrome where we are cutting down cutting down the real people who are actually good at their work or whatever they do. How are these two things, because they are also bringing a lot of value to the organizations? So is it that organizations are willingly or deliberately only looking at people, even social psychopaths, who they are comfortable with, and not comfortable with certain ideas, certain people who may not gel with their thinking, and then they come out and say, listen, we are facing imposter syndrome. Should we trust those people suffering from imposter syndromes, or they are purely inefficient ones? Imposter syndrome is a problem, but it can be a problem with the right ones, not with those people who are letting the social psychopaths, run amok within workplaces. That is not taken. That is not taken forever.
Well, I think there's definitely something to what you're saying in terms of diminishing the contributions and the relevance and the influence of certain people. And, at its core, I think it's often just bias, right? So it could be the perception that if you have darker skin or if you have a different sexual orientation or whatever, that somehow your contributions are not as valuable or as important as somebody else's. And people don't like to talk about it. They like to pretend as if we're in a post-racial world and these things don't matter. But from what I've seen, there are certain people who, when they are here and the racialized person is here, that's okay. But when there seems to be equality in terms of the value of the contributions that the racialized person is bringing, somehow that threatens their identity and makes them want to lash out, makes them want to diminish the contributions of that racialized person or that indigenous person or that person with a disability.
Right. And who are these people? Is it that because they have not got that position, so they are jealous, or is it that it's a intrinsic sort of a thing which will take time to come out? Because will they do the same thing when they are visiting a doctor and who will cure them? It's a life and death situation. Do they have a choice at that point in time? Will they deny it, that no, because you are someone else and I have been talking about this, I don't like your face, I will not take the injection, I am ready to die? Will they do it? Do they do that?
Well, sometimes I have heard physicians and nurses who are Black or Indian or whatever. I've heard them say they've dealt with patients who say they want to wait for the real doctor or the real nurse to come, who they assume is going to be the white person. But the fact is that in certain professions where there's a lot of official licensing and education and training that's required, there are a lot of racialized people who do that work. And the smart people will just be grateful that somebody's willing to, climb all those steps to get into those professions and deliver that service. But I've also seen situations where people don't want to deal with people of different races or ethnicities or whatever in their day-to-day. But when they really need something and only that person has it, they know how to be respectful and appreciate the care that they're getting, whether it's from a consultant, a lawyer, a physician, what have you.
Okay. So it is all about convenience, basically.
I think so. It's about how specialized that knowledge is, and if they can't get it from somebody else, they may just buck up and accept it from the person who knows. But if it's in the day-to-day and it's in the workplace and they can, implement their usual power dynamics and exclusion, then it's a very different thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Dr. Helen, what about the employee? Let's talk about the employees.
Mm-hmm.
How can they become resilient employees amidst such situation? If you are a very powerful person, even if your skin color is not liked, your face is not liked, you can still survive with whatever your accomplishments are, but what about the lesser mortals who are there, who need the job, who want to work, who make a better quality of life for themselves?
Well, see, I want to clarify something. I always talk about career resilience. That's not the same as personal resilience, because a lot of
Okay.
people probably overuse their personal resilience and it lands them in all kinds of trouble. They get burned out and all kinds of things. So, really, in my mind, career resilience is about understanding some of the hidden rules that are happening and making choices, taking actions that put you in a good place so that you can have a long lasting and fulfilling career. And even if things go sideways or go badly, you have things arranged so that you can bounce back quickly and reestablish yourself. So things like making sure that you're not isolated, making sure that you have a rich network. And when I say rich, I don't mean in terms of money. I mean a network of people where there's lots of mutually beneficial relationships so that you're able to help other people, they're able to help you, they're able to, make opportunities happen for you by mentioning your names when certain situations present themselves. Things like making sure you have good work ethic, lots of diligence, keeping your skills up to date. And I think a big one that we don't think about enough is that if you're being mistreated at work, you need to find a new place. You need to find either a different team or a different division or possibly a different organization. Because even if you can tolerate being mistreated, the fact is that eventually it's going to show up in your mental health and your physical health. So when possible, you just need to find a way to either make a big step so that you get out of that situation into something better, or several smaller steps to get into something better.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have also written a book on this subject, Doctor,
I
that
have,
how to be resilient in your career, facing up to barriers at work, by Helen Ofosu. Is it being published? It was supposed to be published.
yeah, it was published. Here it is. It was published in February of 2023.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, perfect.
And basically, because I've been offering executive coaching and career coaching for the past almost 11 years, this book covers the top 10 issues that come up again and again and again in private coaching. And as a rule, my clients are pretty successful. So my feeling is if successful people who have the benefit of one-on-one coaching struggle with these same issues, regular people will as well. So I talk about underemployment, toxic workplaces, bullying, harassment, discrimination, really strategic ways to network and do it proactively to help your career. And this imposter syndrome. I think we mentioned it earlier, but there's one other thing I want to mention. I think that the imposter syndrome tends to play out differently depending on who somebody is. So traditionally, the imposter syndrome is about feeling like you're you're not as well prepared as people think. Like you feel like you're a fraud, and you feel as if you're at the risk of being discovered, and it just kind of hurts your self-confidence. That's the more standard definition of imposter syndrome. But I've discovered that many people who are a member of an underrepresented group, so maybe a racialized person, LGBTQ, what have you, a lot of these people know that they're actually quite good at what they're at their jobs, good in their professions, because they know they would have never had an opportunity had they not been at least as equally qualified as their peers. But because they're always being undermined or undervalued or passed over for promotion or dealing with microaggressions or tall poppy syndrome, I think for those people, it's actually imposter treatment. It's not
Right.
something that came from within. it's because of the way other people treat them and the way other people look at them that they develop this. They call it imposter syndrome, but I think it's really imposter treatment. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Dr. Helen, if you can hold that book a bit for the audience so that they can know it and we can show it well.
Okay.
So,
There you go.
yes, wonderful, wonderful.
And I just finished recording it for Audible. So within the next couple of weeks, people can listen to it if they prefer to listen instead of read.
Right, right, Dr. Helen. There is much to learn from you, and obviously, people would like to connect with you, know more about you. So, tell us about your company, IO Advisory Services, and how can people know more about you, connect more with you, and also for those who like to professionally engage with you.
Okay. So my company is called IO Advisory Services, mostly because my background's in industrial and organizational psychology. Well, outside of psychology, we call it work and business psychology. So that's why the IO. And I've been offering executive coaching, career coaching, some HR consulting, and speaking since 2012, working for the government prior to that. And if people want to reach out, probably the easiest place to find me is theresilientcareer.com. That's the website for the book. And from there are links to all my social media, a link for contacting me, and also a link back to my primary business, IO Advisory Services.
Wonderful, wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.